Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Long Game Podcast, reporting to you live from a submarine. My name is Ben Scallon, and I'm here with my esteemed co-host, Jason Osborne, reporting from Poland, actually, as per usual. That's where he typically resides these days.
Yeah.
And without giving away too much of your political views locally, because I'm sure you want to stay out of the fray in your relatively new home. I'm wondering what you thought of the victory of the conservative candidate in Poland's recent presidential election. I'm wondering if you could fill us in on the ground as to how that's panning out.
Well, can I just say, Ben, coming from a submarine as you are, it's much better than the fascistic red that you had illuminating you, illuminating you before we went on air. You were very much giving those, what did people call those, dark Brandon vibes?
Yeah, it looked like he was punished Biden back when he was given that speech, and he was flanked by soldiers.
Yeah.
Although I will say it kind of, that was obviously terrible optics for him when he was there with his goons in the background, but it was also probably the coolest he's ever looked, all things considered. Usually he looked
Yeah,
like this kind of frail old man. There's something kind of uh badass villain aesthetic about it, where you're there with
I
the
do think working on his staff would have been gas because you're like, all right, he was so sort of incompetent himself at the end. It's like, all right, what cool background are we going to put him against here so that he looks dominant? There's
they
more
should
for
have they should have
some
added flames or something in the background.
But yeah, well, less people be confused because you say sort of my new residents in Poland they'll think I have some sort of like artificial backdrop here or something because that's what we've had the whole time I've been doing the podcast. Yeah, I work from Poland, so my wife and I moved over here a couple of years ago, as everyone will be aware, because it's so insanely expensive in Ireland, and we always intended our goal when we got married is to start a family and to raise it. And as you well know, Ben, not the easiest thing to do in Ireland, and my wife being Polish, much easier to do if we have a foot over here, because as we'll get into, because we're going to talk about the election results, but also just sort of Poland more generally, it's a very livable country for very many reasons. So yeah, that's why I'm coming from Poland as I have been for some time. But I mean, we come back to Ireland very frequently, so we really do have foot in both countries. Although as our listeners will be aware, been more so here over the past couple of months because of the second baby's arrival. But that long preamble aside,
And I'm very sorry to derail the conversation before it even begins, because obviously we want to talk about the election and everything. But I'm really curious. Obviously, Poland is not like some third world country. That almost sounds offensive to have to clarify that, because we all know that Poland is obviously a lovely country. It's perfectly modern in its standard of living. Everything's much more affordable. It's nice, and yet young people flee. You hear about a lot of people leaving the country. You don't hear a lot about a lot of people moving to the country. Why do you think that is? Like, what would be the incentive? I mean, I don't think I would ever leave Ireland. I feel very attached to the country. I'm not saying you don't, but obviously you're married to a woman from there, so it's a little bit
yeah.
different. But yeah, why do you see so many people leaving, and why do you not see more people moving there? Do you think having
Well, not to shoot you down for misinformation on the spot or anything, but I agree. Over the past 20 years or so, it was very much the case that emigration from Poland was quite high. And indeed, as we in Ireland know, because the Poles are one of the first and biggest groups to really make their way over during the Celtic Tiger. But that has definitely turned around in recent years, and indeed, the Polish government has sort of launched initiatives and things like this to attract the diaspora back, and they've been sort of doing quite well on that front. The reason they left initially certainly was simply because other countries paid much better than Poland did. I would put it that way. They would work abroad, and a lot of them would send money back to Poland in the same way that immigrants from so many countries do. But as I say, sort of contrary to the point you were making, I think in recent years a lot of people have been returning to Poland for a number of reasons. And yeah, we can talk about this first before getting into the election results, because I think it's probably interesting as well. It's been my experience, and I have a pretty extensive experience of Poland. Like, we've holidayed in multiple places over here. I've been all over the country at this stage. That it feels, and this is maybe be really surprising to people, because I feel like Poland, even though it's a European country and it's nearby, still sounds or feels very distant to Irish people. It certainly did to me before I had anything to do with the country. It is, though, really interesting. It feels like a first world country in a way that very few countries I've visited in the present era 2025 do. And like this year, for example, I've been to a couple of countries this year, last year. Poland, I tweeted about it before. It feels like it's on the up in a way that a few countries do. And there are really basic things that contribute to this. It's safe. The police are like present, and they kind of, and I know it's a bit of a joke in Ireland sometimes, but like it's just common sense. A lot of the Gardaí in Ireland, I'm not a particularly strong or fit guy, but I would feel pretty confident getting away from them if I had to. It is not that way with the police over here. They're sort of properly intimidating, I suppose I would put it that way, which is what you'd want of the police. I would have no problem with my, and this is such a rare thing to say in 2025, with my wife kind of going out at any time of the day and being sort of confident that she, wouldn't encounter any difficulties. It's like, I won't, painted in rose tinted colors or anything. You get the drunks and things, but they're kind of old fashioned drunks that, just, make comment and then move on.
Trash drunks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So by and large, it's been an extraordinarily safe experience over here, and it's got really good stats on crime and things like this that people can look up if they're interested. It's really clean. The infrastructure works. Like it's amazing to me that Germany's train system is considered to be, there's always that stereotype about German trains being on time. My experience of German trains is shit, quite frankly. Whereas Polish trains are actually really good. They go all over the country, like all of the main cities, loads of the towns in between. It's like nearly complete connectivity all over the place. And I would say one of the biggest factors is that a lot of sort of common sense attitudes still reign. Like it's a very sort of earthy country still, in a way that a lot of Western societies aren't. I don't know. There's a lot goes into making that the case over here, but I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that Poland was a lot poorer for a lot longer than a lot of the Western world was, because we know it's when sort of money really gets going that countries sort of detach from reality a little bit for whatever reason. So all of those things taken together, it's a really, really, and this was, sort of behind our choice, I'd put it that way, really, really family friendly place. And as I say, we maintain a foot in both countries, and we're back in Ireland very frequently, but we just decided to make this our base of operations, as it were, for many reasons. So yeah, that's all just to say that I think it feels like have you ever been? I don't think I ever asked.
No, I've never been. I'd love to go. It sounds like a great place in many different regards. The history of it alone, I think, would be intriguing to me. I'd love to visit the World War II era, the sort of the winged hussars and all of that stuff during the siege of Vienna and all of that. I know obviously Vienna is in Austria before some smartass. I'm saying that they participated in battles in other parts of Europe.
They were key in that, yeah. But it's really interesting because they do manage to blend a lot. Like they've really managed to, obviously the country was absolutely decimated in many regards during World War II, but they've really managed to preserve their history extraordinarily well. Like the Krakow Old Town is one of the most beautiful cities in Europe, no competition. And they I was down there at the end of last year going to a wedding, and we were in the Jewish quarter in Krakow, and it's genuinely like stepping back into the early 20th century. Like it's extraordinarily well preserved. But then on the other hand, like you go to a city like Warsaw, the capital, and it's quite unlike any other city in Europe. Like you've got kind of American style skyscrapers, and I'm not saying these are better or the best or anything, but it's clearly a very dynamic place industry wise. And at the same time, they did the most, and I wrote an article about this actually earlier this year, about how they did the most astonishing restoration job, because like 90% of that city was leveled during World War II. They did the most astonishing restoration job, such that the old town, I think it's a UNESCO site now, but they've really just been really sensible about preserving the country's heritage and history in a way that that is unfortunately rarely replicated across the continent. Um, and just a final point is that they've also done an astonishing job preserving a sense of patriotism, preserving a sort of national mythos and things like this. That is fading in the same way that I think a lot of sort of the vital indicators are fading. Like Poland certainly isn't immune from these things, but I just think sort of the timelines have been very favorable to Europe, because I've often described it that being in Poland now feels like maybe being in Ireland now I was only a child in the 90s, but my understanding feels like maybe being in Ireland in the 90s going to the early 2000s, which is sort of like very uh dynamic, very that sense of being up and coming. Now we obviously know how the story sort of went in Ireland with the recession and things like that, but there's a number of reasons as to why it's different over here. A lot of very strong domestic industry and whatnot. So suffice to say, it's a country I'm extraordinarily fond of, and I think it's doing a lot of things right, even though it's sort of making a lot of some of the same societal failings as Western countries are. But I do think, to get us back onto the topic we wanted to discuss initially, the decision they made was probably a wise one over the weekend with the
decision
election.
to re-elect the conservative candidate Carol Narocki. Am I pronouncing that, or have I horrendously butchered his name?
Absolutely butchered it. No, they elected Karol Nawrocki, so he was a really interesting choice of candidate, because if I remember correctly, there was a poll back when he was not long after he was announced. Nearly half of the country said they'd never heard of this guy. So like, he wasn't someone on the political scene. He was a relative nobody. So it was a pretty bold choice to run him. But so he was elected on Sunday in a really close vote. It was something like, roughly speaking, 51% to 49%. His challenger was the sort of center liberal Rafał Trzaskowski. It was his second time. This guy, Rafał Trzaskowski, he's the mayor of Warsaw. It was his second time running for the presidency, and he's after losing for a second time. So I doubt we'll probably see him again. But I obviously nearly eligible to vote over here, but not quite yet. But suffice to say, if I had been able to vote, I would have voted for it. I think I can fairly say I probably would have been inclined to vote for Nawrocki out of these two choices, because the way the Polish presidency works is that you have less executive power than the American president, but certainly more than the Irish president, to put it this way. Like, the Polish president has a very, very active ability to veto legislation, which is why you've got a center-left government at the moment that would like to make all sorts of progressive and liberal policy developments and things like this. But the current president is conservative, and he's been vetoing all of it, which has made the current government really unpopular, because they haven't been able to do any of the things they said they would. And it's now likely that that veto is going to, well, not likely, it is going to be the case that that veto is going to continue with this new president, Karol Nawrocki, in place, which is only going to make the current government less popular, which makes it more likely that the next government is going to be a conservative one over here. So it is quite a coup for the right in Poland, I would put it that way, because early on no one predicted this guy was going to take it. Like, Trzaskowski, the liberal, was like 10 points ahead in polls. So a really interesting development, but I one that I'm fairly happy to see, I think I can say.
Why do you think people voted for him, given his obscurity? What was it that drove them to choose him as their president?
I think it was a couple of things. I think it was that key point that people were completely disillusioned by, because it was 2 years ago, if I remember correctly now, 2.5 years ago, that the sort of center-left government was elected in, and they had now, it wasn't like an overwhelming mandate. They had to go into this big coalition, a bunch of the parties, in order to make the government work. And they sort of kicked out the conservative nationalist peace government.
So this is Donald Tusk and his crowd, right?
Exactly. So they're currently in power, and they had all sorts of promises for reforms and things like this. They wanted to, sort of liberalize, say, same-sex civil unions, which Poland still doesn't have. They wanted to liberalize abortion law. a lot of the things that you've just seen elsewhere, they wanted to implement in Poland, and clearly a sufficient number of people thought that was a compelling vision. Although again, it wasn't this like they had half the country's mandate or anything like this. They had to go into a pretty broad coalition, and some members of this coalition wouldn't be fond of these things either. So, all just to say, between a complex coalition and the president's veto, they've been able to do nearly none of the things they said they were going to do, which has made them extraordinarily unpopular.
It's
And
kind of funny though, isn't it, to blame them for that? Like I understand people don't fully pay attention to politics a lot of the time and they're just going off vibes, but it's kind of hilarious to like my side blocks your side from doing anything and then says you did nothing, you're useless. Like what? It's kind of a funny way to put it somebody.
No, it is, and I did see a funny post to that effect. It was kind of like, "What's the plan here, Poland?" It's like you anger voted in the conservative nationalist because the say sort of progressive liberal centrist party wasn't getting its reforms through. It's not a particularly coherent strategy, but I think this is sort of where a couple of things come into play as well. Because again, they were promising these reforms, but they seem to have expended most of their energy in sort of political warfare against the former conservative nationalist government. Like they've been flipping state institutions in a way that they formerly criticized the conservative nationalist government for doing. Like the state TV now is very stacked in the present government's favor. They're going after all sorts of judicial reforms. They claim to undo the sort of conservative nationalist government's influence over these institutions, but obviously people were saying they're just looking to do it in their own direction now. And I think a lot of people have been kind of exhausted by that. They're like, you guys are literally the exact same as the other ones, just doing things in the opposite direction. So I think that's part of the thing, but the other part of it is that in the first round of the Polish, because there's two rounds of the Polish presidential election. In the first round, it's actually crazy. And there's an article that I want to write in this at some point about how sort of healthy Poland's democracy is, because there is an insane diversity of legitimate candidates you can vote for. Like, I don't use the sort of term, far right lightly or whatever, but if you want to vote for a far right candidate, you'll probably be able to find them here. You want to vote for like a proper common sense nationalist conservative, you'll be able to find them, which is pretty much what Nawrocki is. But in the first round anyway, the right wing vote was astonishingly strong, especially among young people. I think it was 18 to 39-year-olds.
I heard he did really well with women as well, was one of the things I read.
Yeah, very, very, very much the case. He did well with women, but even in the first round, there was another guy who, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Confederacja Party, but they're always dubbed in the media far right. But they're kind of a coalition on genuinely right wing characters. Their candidate Sławomir Mencen did extraordinarily well in the first round. He got 15% of the vote, which like blew everyone's expectations out of the water. Nawrocki only got 29% in the first round, and Trzaskowski got 31%. So that 15% was a huge chunk. And people were essentially voting for this alternative because they were kind of tired of the two-party system, it seems, and they wanted to open it up to a challenger. And that the best challenger came in the form of this like genuinely right-wing guy, Sławomir Mencen. But then obviously he didn't win, so you were put down to those two candidates again, who are the sort of, Nawrocki, who won, and Trzaskowski. And obviously if you're voting for the right-wing Mencen, you're not going to go back and vote for Trzaskowski, who's a centrist liberal. So obviously more people felt inclined to vote for Nawrocki. So I think it was just Poland, much like everywhere else, is sort of experiencing dissatisfaction with the status quo, I would put it that way. But just the way things were channeled on this occasion, it all went in sort of Nawrocki's favor. So I think the lay of the land at the moment, because I realize I'm speaking a lot here, is that Nawrocki will continue on with vetoing the current government's legislation. I don't think it's happened already, but they called Donald Tusk called himself a vote of confidence in his own government, realizing that his government stance had taken a bit of a blow after failing to get their guy elected. So
which, by the way, is kind of a big deal, I think. Like that's a very honorable, positive thing to do from a democratic perspective, to say, well, look, let the people to deliberately put your own government in the firing line
Yeah.
based on the perceived will of the people, I think is kind of an admirable choice to make on his part.
I agree. I think there was probably also some kind of a risk taking on his part in the hope of kind of shoring up support for his mandate following on this defeat. I would say it was probably but I agree, more dominant in his thinking. But I agree. I think it's also, it is a risk. And, what if it comes back and shows there's no confidence in his government? What sort of mandate is he going to have then? So I think that as it stands at the moment, it's going to be the case that the government is going to struggle to continue with any of its reforms, even as it was struggling beforehand, because his veto is going to be extraordinarily effective. And yeah, I think that kind of sets the stage in 2.5 years' time or so. If the sort of conservatives play their cards right, for them to sort of regain power in the country. So really, Poland is going to be one to keep an eye on over the next couple of years, because it's already become a real sort of powerhouse in Central and Eastern Europe. And I think it's poised to continue sort of cutting a different figure against like Romania, say, who chose their kind of European man in their recent elections. So I think Poland, yeah, really may very well be a powerful voice in this European conversation.
Well, speaking of liberal reforms to society, I think we wanted to touch on another point, which is not really a news story per se, so much as it is an observation about a trend, which I think many of our listeners and viewers might have noticed as well. I don't know how widespread this is, but you were saying to me off camera, Jason, and I agree with you that it seems like Pride Month is, or actually, I think we're up to Pride season now. It used to be Pride. It used to be Pride Day, and then it became a week, and then it was a month, and now it's a season. And I think based on the trajectory, it looked like we were gonna have a new kind of Chinese zodiac calendar where you have like year of bisexual or something. But it looks like we didn't quite get there, because it looks like Pride Month is dying as a cherished and beloved cultural institution.
Family tradition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Fun for the whole family. It seems like it's going the way of the dodo, because we're now in the third day of June, which is when all of this is supposed to kick off, and it feels in Dublin and in other places I've been recently that it is incredibly muted compared to the in-your-face mania that we had seen even just a few years ago. And it seems like it's been becoming less and less prominent with each year that goes by. Like, I remember thinking even last year, this is a little bit quiet, and it's only increased in its decline since then. So I'm wondering, I presume you guys have an even more pronounced version of that over in Eastern Europe. Do you think this is kind of a worldwide slow grinding down of the whole movement that we've seen?
Well, yeah, not to speak about Poland over much, but I'd say outside of Warsaw and Gdansk and the big cities was never really took a big hold in Poland. Even though you obviously have the people who would love to see it come in and they do their little protests and rallies and things like this, but certainly no, not a staple over here in the same way that it would be in Western Europe. But as I say, we spent an enormous, we're really between Ireland and Poland most of the time, and it was very much my experience. Like I said to you again before we came on off cameras, like the 2010s in some sense feel like a bit of a rainbow colored fever dream in some sense. And people say, gosh, why are you so obsessed with it? It wasn't that way for us. But it's like this stuff reached really weird proportions. Like I won't really stand for any airbrushing of history, this idea that it didn't reach this fever pitch, because I will never forget, like, when June would come around, it was genuinely an onslaught of posts from institutions, welcoming this. One of the craziest pictures I genuinely think of the early 21st century, when people are looking back through history books, would be of one of the main streets in London. I forget which one it is now, with the Progress Pride flag in rows across the street, all the way down the street. Like, it was genuinely, the religious imagery in all of this has been astonishing. And there was also that
it almost, this is like a really hyperbolic crazy example. I don't mean to compare these movements in terms of their severity, but you know that Mussolini poster where it's like, oh, some kind of weird clay like death mask version of his face, and it says C C C C C, and it was telling
Mm.
people to vote yes to whatever the fascist party was up to at that point. And you just look at it and you go, that's ominous. Even if I knew nothing about him or his movement or what he believes,
Yeah.
why is politics and this movement, whatever it is, being shoved up my ass to this extent? Like, it just looks off-putting.
Poor choice of verb.
Yeah, yeah. In this context, maybe literally, but you know what I mean. Like that.
Yeah.
When I think when any kind of political movement, with certain exceptions, like if it's St. Patrick's Day and the whole country is carpet bombed in Irish tricolors, fine. I don't mind there being a little bit of a kind of uh I was gonna say cult of the nation. That sounds wrong, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
We should idolize and love our country. That's fine. And again, even saying idolize is wrong because you shouldn't make an idol out of your country. But you know what I mean. I give.
It's a normal thing for people. It's a normal thing for people to celebrate, whereas sexuality never was. Like this, it's the whole thing with all of this. It's like, why were we devoting, yeah, as in recent years, a whole month to celebrating a marginal sexuality? Say it's the whole thing was utterly bizarre, and I feel like once we sort of get out of the eye of the, once we get out of the storm, it'll just look increasingly weird in hindsight. As I say, like there was also a lot of this. I feel like in the way of so many things in the Western world, which is so funny because in Ireland we're always hearing about how the far right imports American talking points and things like this. But it's like the story of the 2000s, particularly the 2010s, the beginning of the 2020s, is sort of unthinkingly adopting the talking points of the American left and the American liberals and things like this. Whether it was everyone in Europe turning their profile pictures black after George Floyd and all of this, like all of that conversation around the time, but also the whole pride thing. And I think the reason it's much more muted this time around is because, to give credit to him, the Trump administration has kind of gone to war on this stuff in the US. And I think a lot of like it's the classic one at the beginning of Pride Month, like people looking at, company logos and things like this to see which ones turn their logo rainbow colors and whatnot. I haven't seen any of them do it so far this year. And, again, people might sort of like laugh or say you're making a mountain out of a molehill here, but I really don't think so. I think this is an extraordinarily significant walk back.
One of the reasons I think people have gone off it is not even just because it's not even just conservatives who have lost interest in it. Like, we're obviously traditionally minded people, we're conservative people, so we were never really on board with the whole thing. We don't have that moment of sobriety where you go, oh my gosh, what were we doing? Like, I thought it was madness from the beginning. But even liberal people who are not rabid, foaming at the mouth progressives, I think, are off put by it. And a great specific example of this was Nick Delahanty, who I like Nick. I've interviewed Nick. I think he does great work on the NGO thing. Like, I'm not criticizing him when I say this. He's entitled to his perspective. But the impression I get, I haven't heard him self-described this way, but I get the impression that he's kind of a liberal guy in a lot of ways. Like, he wouldn't be as conservative as me or you, which is fine. Like, he's entitled to that view. And I remember I was interviewing him about wokeism and how society is progressing, if you want to use the progressive label. And he effectively, I'm paraphrasing, but effectively what he said was he doesn't have a huge problem with a lot of the social referendums that we've had in the last number of decades. He thinks they were fine and good, but that we've achieved what we set out to achieve, and so it's time to stop. Basically, he says we don't need to always keep going and always. He kind of wants to freeze society in stasis, was the impression I got from what he said, and say, look, we don't always need to be on a crusade. When the war is over, you can stop and say, okay, happy days, we're done. No, I don't agree that a lot of those social referendums were good things. I think they were harmful, so we can agree to disagree on that. But my point is, I think there are a lot of liberal people who, in good faith, sincerely bought into a lot of those social changes, and they thought, okay, we're done, fantastic, happy days. And then the activists wanted to go a step further and another step further and another step further. And even the liberal people are kind of going, here, what the hell is this? Like, can we stop, please? Like, give it a rest. We don't need to be reaching for this lunacy, you know? And so I think that's part of what's been their undoing, is that they've even started to lose people who are not Latin mass going ultra trads, like, you know, even normal people who
Yeah.
voted yes to gay marriage think that it's all becoming a bit tedious.
I do think that the fact that they again, I would disagree kind of with all of it, but I think for a lot of people, the fact that they lumped the T in with the LGB was kind of a straw that broke the camel's back in many ways, because the trans stuff was genuinely like trying to ask people to believe that 2 + 2 = 5. And I think that was always going to be an extraordinarily tall order. You could certainly make people, a lot of people you could cow a lot of people into silence and, make them just want to keep, because most people just want to get on with their lives, and understandably so. But it was always going to be the case that once there was any sort of, genuine pushback on this, more and more people would feel comfortable coming out to talk about it. And if you were putting, again, it was going to be the LGB with the T, all of those things were going to sort of get, lumped together, I suppose, in the pushback. So now I don't delude myself into thinking that, this great resurgence in conservatism or anything is behind the dying down of this trend. Sort of, yeah, in keeping with, as I say, Nick's point, I think far more likely is that most people don't see the need to keep, and this is where the kind of religious nature of this kind of thing comes in, because we would, being interested in the phenomena of religion and things, I would understand that the reason you have liturgies, the reason you have things that you do every week, is because it always recenters you, refocuses you on the good and on what's important. And this was always described, the whole pride thing was always described as a sort of modern religious phenomena by a lot of religious people, because it very much had those characteristics. It was kind of like this refocusing every year on the revolution, and sort of the peak of the sexual revolution, you might say. But obviously, it's going to sort of snowball for a number of reasons. We're going to start snowballing because once you stop kind of doing that, as society is starting to do, people are going to lose focus. It's kind of going to run out of steam a little bit. But I think even the more pertinent point, and be curious to hear what you have to say about it, is that people had always used to say, sort of social media-esque lines like, oh, if World War III started, we'd stop talking about all of this stuff. And I think the truth contained in that is that all of these sort of, this excessive focus on this sort of frivolous social reform was only possible because we were living in extraordinarily comfortable and stable times. And we're quickly moving out of those extraordinarily comfortable and stable times. Like, as we're seeing increasingly reported, the cost of living is getting insane in Ireland. The sort of immigration situation obviously has a lot of people focused on things like national security, not just in Ireland, but across Europe. There's a very sort of fevered defense atmosphere across Europe at the moment. So I think naturally, once these sort of existential matters start coming into the picture, all of the again, just to use the phrase woke stuff, it was going to be the first thing to be jettisoned. It's just human nature.
And when you also realize that the self-stated goals of the movement have been achieved, you find it really hard to continue to feel passionate and energetic about that. Like, I firmly believe that not in every school, not in every part of the world, I'm talking about in Ireland, I think in most schools across the country, you would be out, and by the way, rightly so. I'm not saying it should be any other way, but if you were to pick on another kid for being gay, let's say, you would be rounded on by all of your peers, all of your fellow students, who would immediately come down on you like a ton of bricks, as it should be, because you shouldn't be bullying people or picking on them for any reason, So it's I totally agree with that. But the point being, I find it very hard to believe, based on my own lived experience and what I've observed from younger people's attitudes, And I'm not an older, like I'm 27, you know what I mean? So I was in school within the last decade. This is not some kind of thing that's crazy.
You weren't cycling to school on your penny farthing or anything.
Exactly, yeah. So like I am of a younger generation that I can tell you how it was when I went to school, and you would absolutely not get away with, picking on the gay kid in your class. Or so if anything, you'd be inviting a disaster on yourself if you were to do that. So
Uh,
my only point with that is when you have a level of social acceptability where every state institution clearly displays in a very public and demonstrative way the flag of this movement, and they have a whole inclusivity policy, and they talk about it ad nauseum, and we have laws on the book, and even teenagers who are known to be the most cruel bullies in the world wouldn't dare say a bad word about it.
mm.
At that point, it's very hard to keep up the perception that you're this oppressed minority who's being victimized by everybody. It doesn't hold water, and I think people kind of just get sick of it at a certain point.
Yeah, I think it's all the problem all status quos face, which is it kind of became the status quo, and then what are you going to rebel against if not the status quo? Which is kind of why, yeah, it kind of a lot of resistance to it, yeah, particularly among even young people I know, yeah, like speaking derogatory, like because I would be opposed to these things, but I wouldn't be inclined to speak derogatorily about anyone because I obviously believe in the same way as we've spoken about with regards to everyone. I think everyone is, has the same dignity, but you sort of see this trend of it, yeah, sort of speaking derogatorily about people both online and in person creeping back in and things like this. So naturally there was always going to be a reaction, and it wasn't just state institutions, it was corporations, it was everything, it was
The Guardian,
every guard, yeah, exactly, and
the defense forces.
like, but you think about this stuff, it's like they were driving around in pride Garda cars. It's like that's crazy. But pointed that I was going to make is as well that this is a really practical point, I suppose, but obviously we live in an age of sort of rising nationalism, during which time flags are really important. Obviously, we're seeing that in Ireland with seeing that at the marches, the presence of the tricolour, also the harp. Seeing that indeed, speaking about the Polish context, the Polish flag is sort of omnipresent over here in many ways. And just in sort of right wing and nationalist circles across the continent, flags are becoming extraordinarily important again. And it's a really practical. But now I know that a lot of the people inclined to be supporting, say, the LGBT lobby or the LGBT movement, whatever way you want to put it, wouldn't necessarily fit in comfortably at a right wing event or anything like this. But there are only so many flags can sort of fill the public space, and as the volume of national flags starts surging again, it seems to me you're going to have less and less rainbow flags. I think it's not necessarily a very quantifiable point, but I just feel like that kind of social moment is gone, and we moved into another one again, one that's a lot more concerned with issues of national security and essentially existential matters than it is with social reforms and things like this. So I think it's sort of out at the moment that we're living in a sort of we're in a transition phase, which is sort of out with the rainbow flag, in with the national flags and things like this. And I think that's only going to become more prominent. The 2020s have been so crazy so far. I can't even imagine what the 2030s are going to be like.
Yeah. I'd almost make a prediction that, and I'm not happy about this. This is not a good thing. I feel like one of the biggest problems that's coming down the track in the next decade is probably going to be the reaction to wokeism, which will be an excess of right wing idolatry, effectively in the opposite direction, where you're going to get a kind of intolerant, authoritarian streak of people who have been so marginalized, and they've been demonized to such an extent that usual you one of the factors that humans have that constrains them from their worst excesses is things like shame. You don't want to be thought of as a bad person. You don't want to be you don't want to lose standing in the community, and so that kind of forces you beyond basic morality to temper your words, to be respectful to people, to try to package things in a way that will reach other people and be diplomatic. Whereas if you've been just horrendously demonized for years and arguably decades on end for having very normal opinions, you do get like there is a nihilistic element emerging on the right. They just don't care anymore, and they almost, if anything, they almost enjoy being anarchists who just say, "Yeah, I'm a scumbag and I hate you," basically,
Yeah.
and I actually take pride in that, and so I feel like you're going to see a real nasty reaction from the right, which is not a good thing and is not something I hope for. I hope that that would be averted, but
Yeah, I
unfortunately,
mean,
I think it's a kind of
ab-
an inevitable pendulum reaction to what we're seeing now.
I think yeah, I think that's dead right. I think like there's absolutely no reason why say the right can't be as godless as the left at the extreme ends of the extreme ends of the spectrum. But it does get into the really interesting topic about how kind of the Western order, the foundational myth of the Western order in the present iteration really is World War II. And that is breaking down. And a large part that contributed to that breaking down was the fact that, Nazis, Hitler is obviously the modern Satan, the secular Satan, to put it that way. The Nazis kind of the demonic order, to put it that way. But the status quo, the progressive liberal status quo that we've been living through has been throwing Nazi at everyone and their mother for the past what certainly the past 10-15 years. Like, they literally completely water the word out of existence, essentially. That's just one example of the way in which the sort of the mythos is breaking, because then you've got, like, say, we hold views as just ordinary Catholics that I'm sure people would have applied the label Nazi to us over the past, say, 10-15 years. Things like, yeah, believing in traditional marriage, believing in these whole range of basically normal opinions. But once it's really interesting. It feels a bit like a dam breaking, because, like, I'd heard someone say it. There's this sort of orthodox YouTuber that I'm a big fan of, Jonathan Peugeot. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he was essentially saying that there's going to come a time when, say, the last people who were alive, say, during World War II, or who were close to those events, die. Then you have a population who, you know, only sort of distantly recollects what that time was really about. They've sort of just been passed down the narrative through people who remembered it. And it won't really have any sort of, power beyond that of any other story. And then they'll be completely free to rewrite society according to whatever story they want to tell next. So I
Because
suppose
I
like
mean, sorry to interrupt you, but like Napoleon at one point in Europe was basically the Hitler of his day in terms of how he was perceived. Like you could be you had these people who were like Napoleon cultists almost after his death, and if you were caught with literature glorifying him, you could get in trouble in this kind of a way. And now, if you say I like Napoleon, nobody really gives a shit. They don't care. He's just kind of he's one of many historical. He's like Frederick the Great or something. It's like, yeah,
yeah,
he did good things, he did bad things. Who cares really? Um, and so yeah, in the immediate aftermath of something, basically, just to your point, I'm agreeing with you that as you move on in history, even like terrible villains who were despised within the immediate aftermath of their life eventually just kind of become a historical figure, and you're like, yeah, whatever,
yeah.
you know.
I think that's exactly right. And like the basic point that I was making there is that, like, yeah, the emotion will be taken out of all of these terms. Like, it won't be such a charged conversation anymore, which sort of allows, yeah, because that dynamic very much sort of kept a certain shape on society. But once that sort of power is gone, it sort of throws everything open out into flux, and, like, pretty much, you'll have genuine Nazis out in the open who won't be sort of they won't really have any of the negative connotations with Nazis anymore that they did in the immediate aftermath of World War II. So it's just to say that yeah, I mean it's very much well, to bring it back to this concept that I only heard recently. I don't know if I brought it up on the podcast before. I heard an Australian pastor speaking about how what the period that we're living through is best defined as a gray zone, and he defined a gray zone as passing from one era into another, but the previous era hasn't fully dissolved and the coming era hasn't fully come into being. And I feel like that's exactly sort of the situation we find ourselves in now, where sort of old orthodoxies are in sort of full, fast-paced dissolution, and the new orthodoxies have not been fully established yet. And I think that's a very sort of societally anxious place to be. I do feel like more than I did even in the 2010s, I feel like there's a really intense cultural conversation taking place about what Ireland is, what Europe is, in a way that hasn't happened in my lifetime. So it's suffice to say, I do sort of see the breakdown of the Pride Month, to get back to where we started, as falling fully within this pattern.
Just to and we do have another topic that we wanted to get to, but just on what we're discussing, I think one of the reasons for the rehabilitation of certain historical figures who should not be rehabilitated, in my strong opinion, because what they did was reprehensible in many regards. I mean, eugenics is reprehensible. Loads of things that are matter of public record, that even if you're like a historical revisionist, you can still just look at some of these people's public statements and see that they believed in reprehensible, idolatrous beliefs. So, with all of that said, I think one of the reasons why you would see a resurgence about this among young men, and I think Rod Dreher was talking about this recently, is that if you have a society that you're convinced hates you, which I think it's quite kind of hard to argue that there is a certain element within the West's leadership class that doesn't hate its own citizens. When they talk with such contempt about white men, and you're male, pale, and stale, and you're pasty, and you're this and you're that, and they have nothing but scorn and disdain. Your demographic that you belong to are the cause of all the wrongs in the world. You were guilty of every sin throughout history. You're scum. You're awful. And these people also lie to you relentlessly all the time. You go to a protest and you look around and you see there's 20,000 people there, and then you go home and you read the news report and they say 1,000 people turned up, or these kinds of you're just constantly being lied to about everything. It gets to the point where you go, well, if you don't like this guy, he must have been all right, because you don't have my best interest at heart. Everything you say is to my detriment, and you if you hate him, then he must have done something right. That's the way a lot of people think. I do not think that way. I do not agree with that. But I think that the resurgence in these totalitarian ideas that we're seeing on the right is directly a consequence of the antagonism from the left-leaning establishment for years and years. I think it was absolutely inevitable and tragic that we have been led to this point.
Yeah, I think it's a point that like you and I long made, and the people indeed in Catholic circles I think have been very sensitive to, which is that, yeah, as we were saying earlier, the kickback to a lot of the toxic societal discourse that has been going on, for the past like 15 years, certainly. It was always going to be really ugly and always going to be really violent, but it didn't stop them yet. Like, how the hell is it an acceptable thing to call like half the population male, pale, and stale? Like that according to every modern metric, that's an incorrect thing to say, but there's a certain group you can say it about and you're not going to receive any kickback. So yeah, it was always going to be the case that the consequences of this were going to be ugly, and it doesn't mean you have to like it, but that's in the same way that, water runs downhill, there's going to be kickback to all of this stuff. So yeah.
Unfortunate to see it happen, given that it was so avoidable. But speaking of something that is not avoidable, something that is inexorable, like your height that is bestowed upon you at birth, we might move on to a slightly more frivolous topic that we wanted to get to, which is
frivolous for some. This one's gonna go straight to my core.
Well, so many of us will, of course, be familiar, at least tangentially, with the dating website Tinder, the dating app. I've never used Tinder. I've never used any kind of dating website or technology, but we're all familiar with this. We see memes about it. It's part of the culture and a very significant part of the culture. Many people have this is the main primary method by which they meet members of the opposite sex for romantic purposes. And they have now introduced a couple of new measures. One of the measures which they introduced relatively recently was height verification for men, because we all know, whether it should be the case or it shouldn't be the case, women have a height preference generally. They want to date a man who's taller than them, ideally over 6 foot. And men know this. And so if you're a man who's under that, you're unlikely to get a look in, or at least less likely than you otherwise would be. So men exaggerate their height and they say that, I'm actually a couple of inches taller than I am. I mean, I don't have to do this because I'm 6'9", so this isn't a problem for me. I'm joking. But the point is, women, they show up expecting some kind of 6'1" guy, and then the guy turns up and he's clearly 5'9", and they go, what the hell is this? So they introduced a verification thing where they independently check it. I don't know exactly the logistics of how it works, but they make sure that you are the height that you say you are. And now, in addition to that, they've added in a feature where women can add a filter. I mean, it's not specifically for women. Theoretically, men could use the feature too, but we all know it's for women. Men don't care about the height of women generally. So it means that as a woman, you can say, I only want you to show me men who are over 6'2", and don't even show me anybody under that. I don't care. And so this has caused a manlit uprising and a revolt where people are sickened, saying, I'm not even going to get a chance, because no woman is going to put her setting down and say, yeah, I'm willing. Show me all men who are over 5 foot.
Well, yeah, like I'll put it this way: I'm 5'6", and I don't understand why someone would set the height preference at 5'6". It's like, what is it about that height that you choose?
So it seems like, we're not red pill guys. We're not into the whole, like, we've criticized the Andrew Tates of this world many a time, but from the perspective of having unrealistically absurd standards and hypergamy and all of that stuff that they talk about, I can't imagine this sort of thing is going to help male female relationships. And joke, like, I'm 6'1". Also, we're both happily married, so it's totally immaterial. It doesn't make any difference to myself or Jason whatsoever. So it's
the only difference it makes is always that my wife's constantly saying she wishes I was as tall as Ben.
but like, it's more of a notional problem for people who are not in the dating scene. But I do think it's I'm of two minds about this, because on one hand, you want to say it's pretty unfair and harsh, and you could say, oh, it's a double standard, because if men instituted a filter where they said, I don't want any girl over a certain weight, then or like her body fat percentage or BMI, then everybody would have a screaming heart attack and freak out. But then on another level, I don't know how I feel about it, because you are, of course, entitled to have whatever preferences you want. But is there not an element of this that sort of commodifies human beings, where you are, in the ordinary course of events, you just go out into the world and you meet all sorts of people, tall, short, fat, skinny, muscular, all different kinds of people, blonde, brown hair, red hair, freckles, no freckles. And in the course of your life, you might meet somebody of the opposite sex and you get along with them and you find them funny, and, eventually one thing leads to another and you guys get together. But if you can be as picky as you want to be and specifically almost design your ideal partner, does that not just completely screw over ordinary people? At least people who are physically ordinary, who can't do much about that, who might have a lot to offer. They might be hilarious, they might be intelligent, they might be very driven and hardworking and have all kinds of great traits that you would actually like if you got to know them, but you're just going to totally pass them over because they don't meet a certain physical criteria that you've set. I don't know how good that is for society.
Yeah, I would be more black-pilled about this story, except for the fact that I honestly don't think Tinder relationships are the ones that are, contributing to the world's children and things like this. So, in the grand scheme of things, I don't particularly think a lot of these relationships matter all that much, um, at the sort of societal level. But I agree entirely with your observation, because I've been trying to put it into words before we came on, and I do realize this. This is like, or I do realize it now, which is that it's kind of like peak individualism, which is that, yeah, you're right. In the normal course of operation in the world, you go out, you meet someone, you don't control how tall they are, you don't control this attribute about them, you don't control that attribute. But through encountering them, you might be like, oh, I actually really like this person, and then it just kind of goes from there. Whereas this gives you the opportunity to choose in advance various, attributes about the person. I realize that if I were some young man who's been vilified by the media and the elite of the world, I would 100%, as soon as this filter came in, be setting my height to like an inch over the average or whatever it is. Yeah, let's say 5'6". I'd be putting my height at like 6'3" or something like this, because I feel like if a woman had put like 6'2" into her filter or something, she should be getting what she deserves when I show up in my like platform heels. Um, but yeah, how my stilts. Yeah, you didn't specify with stilts or without, but I really do feel like it's essentially it's a superficial, vain thing to add in. The difficulty is I can't talk about this topic now, having given away that I'm 5'6". Everyone's like, "Oh, he's speaking from the heart," but I do feel like sort of superficial, vain metric that like isn't going to contribute to better relationships. That's for sure. It's like if you're able to, yeah, to give a good anecdotal example, like my wife and I, we met each other a couple of months before we even became friends, and then we were friends for some months before we ended up dating. And I think a lot of the reason my wife didn't see me as a romantic option initially was kind of quite literally because when she turned to look around the room, her eyes would go over the top of my head. But no, it ultimately was because I mean, she sort of just didn't see me physically in that, but it was through getting to know me that she realized there was something there. And I think that's kind of, a lot of the magic of relationships and things like this, like just eradicate that. So I think that it's, it works well for a dating app, but in terms of establishing good relationships and I suppose contributing towards the fixing of society in this regard, this is actually going to go against that, I would say.
I think also that there is, and this is not a uniquely female problem. This is a problem for everybody in the world. That one of the things that's been really damaging about social media is that people's expectations are ludicrous for what they think they're entitled to and what they think is realistic that they will actually be able to receive from a partner. And because of that, like if you're going on Instagram or you're going on whatever social media platform you use and you're seeing the top 100th of 1% most attractive humans on earth, and they don't even, and they're already unbelievably attractive, and then they have like filters and Photoshop and lighting and so on to make them even more preposterously unrealistic, and that becomes your norm. Subconsciously, on some level, anybody who's remotely normal is just not, it doesn't stack up to this preposterous standard that you have. Whereas 100 years ago or 200 years ago, if you grow up in like a town or a village, you're absolutely chuffed if you're with a girl who, by global standards, by the standards of the entire human race, she might be pretty ordinary. But to you, in the context of where you live, she's fantastic. You're over the moon. You're delighted. But and same goes for her to you. Whereas if she knows there's, you understand what I'm saying, that people their
Well, yeah, people's
expectations that they're
expectations
totally
are being
warped. Where
warped.
women are like, no, 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 I want, and again, men do the same thing. I'm not singling out women, but just to use the example because we're talking about the Tinder policy, like the women are like, no, no, I want a guy who's like 6'6" and he has to be so muscular he can't fit through doorways, and he has to be a billionaire, and it's like, that's actually not common. Like, can you maybe just manage your expectations a little bit? And again, we say this as there's almost no way to talk about this without sounding like you are personally butthurt. Again, like I am 6'1" and I'm married and I have no interest in
Yeah, you
using
passed
Tinder.
the
Even if
filter.
I was single, I wouldn't be using Tinder. So it's not an issue for us. It's for people in general. But sorry, you were gonna say?
No, I was you passed the filter, but no, I must say I do get amusement out of it because the reaction that I saw to this announcement was like, someone had prominently posted something like, "Oh, it's so over, short kings," and I was like, I don't know, I really love this designation, short king. I would like to think that I'm among them. I don't know whether that's for me to say. I think it's for other people to deem you a short king.
To be
Uh,
crowned by the people.
yeah, exactly.
Comment down below if you think Jason is a short king, and we'll see what the audience consensus is. I think
I,
you are. You have my vote.
Thank you very much. I mean, regardless whether people think I am or not, I mean, I've already got two children, so my genes are going to continue one way or another. But
That's the other thing. I'm sorry to cut you off, but just on that as well, like, not to like, I don't know. We were talking earlier about how like there are loads and there are billions and billions of people in the world right now, and the majority of men are not over 6 foot. So that kind of just tells you that they're actually short men are people too. They're not actually subhuman scum who are incapable of uh being loved or loving other people or being perfectly adequate men in their own lives. Like you are actually not some sort of degenerate slime
it's
who
gonna,
is
yeah,
just
I just know as soon as Tinder puts this filter in, it's gonna be like that scene in was it Avengers Infinity War when Thanos clicks his fingers. It was like all the short men will just start disappearing from women's preferences on Tinder. But I don't know. I on a sort of less directly connected level to it, but I think as an effect of it, it just strikes me as such a vapid development. It's like pe- now I'm pretty radical in my views on it. This is kind of the place where your average progressive liberal will call me a Nazi. I'm kind of the opinion that like if you're in a relationship, I don't know, I haven't figured out, I haven't thought this through enough. Having two kids hasn't given me the time to do this. But I feel like if you're in a relationship that meets certain criteria, like you've been together for a certain amount of time, you're married or something, which shows I still shows a degree of seriousness about the relationship, and you choose not to have kids, I think you should be paying a tax. I don't know what sort of formula they'd use to work this out, but the equivalent of what you'd be spending on kids anyway, that goes towards like that goes extra towards pensions because kids when they're older will be working towards the pension schemes, goes towards the upkeep of society in a way that kids do. Because again, this is where I'm radical, and again, this again applies to people who choose not to have them, not people who can't have them, not victimizing people here unnecessarily. I feel like we live in a culture that's just all about sort of like take. And I think the way this works back into Tinder is like these vapid relations which with completely impractical considerations, like I just want a guy 6 foot, 6'2" or whatever. You there is no guarantee in that metric that it's going to be a successful relationship that will contribute in any way to the good of, well, you first of all, or your family, or your social circle, or society more broadly. Um, I feel like, this is just a complete wrong way to be going because I mean, yeah, I obviously think that personal fulfillment is important in everything. I believe that God calls us to be happy and whatnot. But I also believe that, traditionally, we live in an age of radical individualism, and in many ways, that's been really, really bad for society. I think a much healthier basic unit of society is the family, and this is obviously just an unfathomable point to a lot of the commentators and a lot of the thought in sort of not just modern Ireland, but across the board in the West. And I feel like, yeah, measures like this contribute nothing to society. They contribute to, like, I don't know, you maybe have a couple of good, if you find your 6'2" Chad and you get a couple of good Instagram pictures out of it, you get a couple of experiences, well and good for you, but like you haven't really added anything to, you haven't really contributed any good for anyone beyond yourself. And you probably even haven't contributed that much good for yourself either. So I would I'd get down on my knees and implore the Tinder managers not to do it.
Yeah, there's gonna be massive social unrest the minute this comes in. We're gonna see riots in the streets from the Munchkin uprising or something.
Gardaí getting record numbers of knee injuries. Get these little fellas swarming around their ankles, biting them.
The good news is it won't take up that much prison space. You could have like 20 people to a cell or something, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, compact criminals.
Pulling up in like a clown car almost to you know, like a normal sized car with like 30 people jump out.
This is just so funny to me, and I enjoy exploring it because it's like I find this stuff genuinely funny. But like height is an unchangeable thing. Whereas, yeah, again, just to flip it onto the other side, if you were to make fun of, like, say, certain categories of women based on their weight, which absolutely is a controllable thing, like, oh my, you would just be seen as this inhuman monster. And it's like, here are places where well, I wouldn't say toxic femininity, because I think that a lot of factors play into making that probably taboo, and I haven't even figured out all of them. But yeah, it's just another way in which it's kind of like, oh, you know, height verification, fine. And it's like, well, yeah, we can joke about it, but like in reality, it probably isn't really.
Yeah, it's pretty messed up, I think, in general, to make fun of people for things that they can't change and which actually don't detract from their humanity or overall desirability. Like to mention to come back to the aforementioned Napoleon, like he was on the shorter side, so the story goes, and he went on a decades long tear across Europe where he basically brought the known world to its knees. So he was not exactly lacking in the masculinity department, you know, and you have endless examples like that of people who absolutely kicked ass and took names. You know, and he probably had like 6'5" Chads under him who were getting him his coffee, you know. So that kind of just goes to show.
I know. If I were in his position, I would be purposely employing guys who were 6 foot plus to do very menial tasks for me. But like that is a documented phenomenon. I think it's called the Napoleon complex. I don't know all the ramifications of that, but I know certainly one of them is this idea that, yeah, short men sort of try to make up for their sense of inadequacy by conquering the world.
Well, long may it continue, you know, and hopefully Tinder will not be the end of this masculine imperative.
I actually think this is what's going to push some short king over the edge. And we were talking about, you know, the things that are radicalizing men earlier and that are going to result in consequences. The great Tinder filter is going to be the one that pushes some short king over the edge.
World War III imminent now. With that said,
some 4'7" guy.
With that said, thank you all so much for watching. As per usual, we will be back next week for another episode of the Long Game Podcast, and we look forward to seeing you all then. So thank you so much for watching as usual, and God bless.